At the Thanksgiving dinner, my son said, "Shut up, Mom. Nobody cares." I just stood up and left. Then I stopped paying their loans, withdrew the money, and left the country. The next day, 55 missed calls. I'm Joan Patterson, a retired nurse, a widow, and a mother who once believed love meant sacrifice. The apartment is quiet except for the soft tick of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. The scent of lavender lingers in the air, mixing with the faint smell of old paper. On my lap lies a faded wedding photograph, David and me, standing outside our first apartment, smiling as if the world belonged to us. I trace his face with my thumb, remembering how alive he looked that day. It has been nearly 30 years since his heart stopped without warning. I can still hear the echo of the doctor's voice, the hush that followed. That night, after everyone had left, I locked myself in the bathroom. The mirror showed a woman I didn't recognize, eyes red, shoulders trembling, suddenly alone with a 10-year-old boy who had just lost his father. I pressed my hands to the sink and whispered, "My son will have every opportunity we never did. He will never know want. I will make sure of it." That vow became the engine of my life. From then on, my days blurred together in endless motion. At Christ Hospital, I worked double shifts until exhaustion became routine. My feet swelled inside old nursing shoes. My back ached like an old wound. Dinner was often canned soup in the break room, eaten quickly before the next call light blinked. When coworkers went out for drinks, I smiled and said I was too tired. The truth was simpler. I couldn't afford it. Every dollar was spoken for. My old Honda rattled down the same roads for 20 years. I mended uniforms by hand, wore clean but outdated clothes, and cut coupons like prayers. The small account I called Sterling's Future Fund was my lifeline. It held not just money, but meaning. Every deposit was a promise kept to the woman who once cried in the mirror. There were moments when the silence felt like a weight pressing down, but I didn't resent it. I found peace in purpose. When Sterling brought home a report card filled with A's, I pinned it over the kitchen sink and smiled through tears. His victories were my reward. His laughter was my paycheck. I remember the night he told me he wanted to go to college out of state. I nodded, pretending I wasn't terrified of how I would pay for it. After he went to bed, I sat at the table with my calculator and a mug of lukewarm tea, rearranging numbers until the impossible looked barely manageable. People said I gave up too much. Maybe I did. But when you love deeply, sacrifice stops feeling like loss. It becomes your breath. On quiet nights, I look around my apartment and wonder where the years went. I built my son's future, brick by brick, believing love would return the same way. But love doesn't always come back. And sometimes, the walls you build with devotion end up keeping you out. When Sterling's acceptance letter from New York University arrived, I watched him tear it open at the kitchen table. His hands shook, his eyes bright with disbelief. I got in. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking. I pulled him into my arms, and for the first time in years, I cried from pure joy. That night, after he left to celebrate, I sat alone with my calculator and a stack of bills. Tuition, housing, books. It was more than I earned in a year. But I didn't hesitate. I cashed out my savings, took a personal loan, and signed up for overtime at the hospital. My body ached, but my heart was full. Every double shift, every bleary sunrise, every meal eaten. Standing up felt like a step toward his future. 4 years later, I stood at his graduation, a small figure among hundreds. When they called his name, I saw him lift his arms in triumph. My chest swelled with pride. I clapped until my palms burned, tears sliding down my cheeks. He didn't see me in the crowd, but that didn't matter. I had kept my promise. Then came Layla, the first time I met her. She swept into my apartment in high heels and perfume that filled the room. She was polite, but distant, her eyes drifting over my simple furniture. Sterling looked at her the way I used to look at David, like she was his entire world. When they got engaged, she described her dream wedding, a country club by the river. White roses. A live band. I nodded. Already calculating costs I couldn't afford. Sterling came by one evening, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, we're a little short," he said softly. I understood. I broke into my retirement fund and wrote the check. I told myself it was love. At the wedding, Layla glowed under the chandeliers while Sterling spun her across the floor. The music was beautiful. The guests radiant. I stood at the edge of the crowd, holding my champagne, smiling through exhaustion. I told myself this was what happiness looked like. A few months later, they wanted to buy a house, something perfect for starting a family. Layla said, Hyde Park. 2 stories. Big yard. Marble counters. I warned them it was expensive. But Sterling brushed it off. "It's an investment. Mom, we'll manage." When the bank hesitated, I provided the down payment with the last of David's life insurance and co-signed the mortgage. Sterling squeezed my hand. "You've always believed in me," he said. I smiled, though the signature felt heavier than any shift I'd ever worked. The house was stunning. Polished floors, high ceilings, sunlight streaming through glass. But every time I visited, I felt out of place. Layla welcomed me with a perfect smile that never reached her eyes. Still, I kept coming every Sunday, carrying my homemade pie. It was my ritual, my anchor. I arrived early, helped set the table, told Leo and Chloe stories about their grandfather, how he once dropped a turkey on Thanksgiving and laughed until he cried. They used to giggle. Later, they began to look at their mother before they laughed. I pretended not to notice. Those dinners kept me going. They were proof that I still belonged, that all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, meant something. I didn't yet see the cracks forming beneath the polished surface. For now, I was simply a mother proud of her son. A woman who had given everything for love, unaware that the very world I built for him would one day turn against me. It happened so slowly, I almost didn't notice. The change was quiet, like the faint crack of wood before it splinters. One Sunday, as I started telling a familiar story about Sterling's first day of school, he let out a soft sigh, barely audible, but sharp enough to cut through the warmth of the dining room. "Mom," he said, smiling thinly. "We've heard that one before." I laughed it off, pretending not to notice the impatience in his voice. But the air shifted. It was subtle, yet unmistakable. The space I once filled with comfort now felt borrowed. Layla's reactions came next. Quiet and deliberate. When I'd offer to help in the kitchen, she'd say, "Oh no, Joan, you just sit. You've done enough." Her smile was polite, but her tone carried a distance I couldn't name. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But soon her little jokes became regular tiny jabs wrapped in charm. "You're so cute," she said one evening, as I tried to show her my old recipe for pot roast. "You and your old-fashioned cooking these days. We use air fryers, not crockpots." Sterling chuckled. Not out of cruelty, but habit. I smiled too. Even though it stung, the dismissals grew bolder. During conversations, Layla would glance at her phone or exchange knowing looks with Sterling whenever I spoke. If I offered advice, she'd tilt her head and say, "Oh, that's interesting," the way people do when they mean irrelevant. Still, I convinced myself it was stress. Young families had pressure I could never understand. I told myself she didn't mean harm, that she was just tired, that he was just distracted. But denial has a way of turning pain into routine. One Sunday, I decided to bring something special, a family photo album I had kept for decades. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but the photographs inside were pieces of our lives. David, holding baby Sterling at the zoo. Sterling's first bike. Our old house in winter. A snapshot of me in my nurse's uniform, smiling through exhaustion. I wanted Leo and Chloe to see where they came from. to know the faces and moments that shaped us. After dinner, I placed the album gently on the coffee table and said, I thought maybe we could look through some of these together. Layla didn't even look up from her wine glass. Oh, Joan, not now, she said, her voice light but firm. Nobody wants to look at those dusty old things. They're just cluttering up the coffee table. Clutter. The word hit me like a slap. I froze, my hand still resting on the leather cover. Sterling looked uneasy for a moment, then glanced at Layla and said softly, Maybe later. Mom. His eyes slid away before mine could meet them. I nodded, forcing a smile as I lifted the album back into my lap. Of course, I said. Later. Leo and Chloe were whispering nearby, laughing at something on their tablets. I sat quietly, flipping through the pages alone, my fingers trembling slightly. Every photograph that had once carried warmth now felt like proof of something lost. In the weeks that followed, the distance grew heavier. The children began to echo their parents' tone without even realizing it. We've heard this one before. Grandma, Chloe said when I started another story about her father as a boy. Leo giggled, repeating, Yeah, we already know. Their laughter was light, innocent, but it cut deep. I tried to laugh with them. You're right, I said softly. Grandma does repeat herself. At night, I replayed the moments in my head, the sighs, the smirks, the interruptions. I told myself I was too sensitive, that every family goes through phases. They're just tired, I whispered while washing the same plate 3 times. Sterling's under a lot of pressure. They don't mean it, but beneath the denial, something inside me was beginning to shift. There was a quiet awareness taking root, a realization too painful to name. I was becoming invisible in the home I had helped build, a ghost sitting at her own table. One evening, as I left after dinner, I glanced through the front window before getting into my car. Layla was laughing, clearing the table while Sterling poured her another glass of wine. The photo album still sat on the shelf where I had left it, untouched. I stood there for a long moment, watching the flicker of light on the glass, before finally turning away. I didn't cry that night, not yet. But as I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the dark road ahead, I could feel something inside me begin to harden, something small and silent, but alive. It was the sound of the first crack forming. The house gleamed that Thanksgiving polished floors. Soft music, candlelight flickering across a table set for perfection. The smell of roast turkey and rosemary filled the air, warm and rich. I had baked 2 pies that morning, even though Layla insisted the caterers would handle dessert. It's tradition, I'd said. She smiled thinly. If it makes you happy, Joan. Now I sat at the far end of the long table, surrounded by laughter that didn't quite reach me. Layla, elegant in burgundy silk, poured Sterling another glass of wine. The children chatted politely, their voices soft and careful. Everything looked perfect. Yet I felt like an ornament, something placed for effect, not meaning. I kept my smile fixed, focusing on the little things, the clink of silverware, the scent of cinnamon, the faint hum of conversation. I told myself this was family. This was success. This was what I had worked for. When Layla raised a toast to home, to health, to everything we've built, glasses clinked all around. Sterling's arm brushed hers affectionately as he whispered something that made her laugh. I looked down at my plate and thought of the years I'd spent to make this moment possible. The loans, the extra shifts, the empty savings account. All for him. Dinner moved on to talk of vacations and promotions. I chimed in where I could, careful not to interrupt. Then came a quiet lull, the kind that invites memories to surface. I smiled, feeling the pull of nostalgia. You know, I began softly. Your grandfather and I spent our first Thanksgiving with nothing but a roasted chicken. We couldn't afford a turkey that year. I laughed gently, remembering. He burned it completely, and we ended up eating mashed potatoes from a box, laughing the whole night. It was "Shut up, Mom." The words were quiet but hard as glass. I froze. Sterling didn't even look up from his plate. "It's so boring," he said, his tone flat. "Nobody cares." The room went utterly still. Layla smirked into her wine glass, pretending to hide it behind a sip. The children stared at their plates, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hand trembled as I set my fork down. The sound of metal on porcelain seemed deafening. I waited for him to realize what he'd said, for his eyes to soften, for some hint of remorse, but none came. He kept cutting his turkey as if nothing had happened. Layla finally looked up. "Oh, Sterling," she said lightly. "You're terrible." Her laugh was brittle, rehearsed, and it made everything worse. The humiliation burned through me like fire. My chest tightened, my throat dry. I tried to speak, but no sound came. I looked at my son, my only son, and saw not cruelty, but indifference. That hurt more than anger ever could. The silence stretched. The ticking of the dining room clock filled the air. Even the children didn't move. I forced a small smile and folded my napkin neatly, though my hands were shaking. "Excuse me," I whispered, rising slowly. "I think I need some air." No one stopped me. In the hallway, the laughter started again. Soft at first, then louder, as though nothing had happened. I stood by the front door, gripping the edge of my coat, listening. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. Outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I walked down the porch steps, my heels clicking against the stone path. The lights from the house glowed behind me, warm and golden, like a world I no longer belonged to. I reached my car, but didn't start it. I just sat there, staring through the windshield, watching my breath fog the glass. My reflection stared back. Tired eyes, drawn mouth. A woman stripped of her place at the table she built. That moment stretched into forever. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, final. I thought of the promise I'd made to David all those years ago, that our son would have every opportunity, every comfort. I had kept it. I had given everything. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something with terrible clarity. This wasn't a bad moment. It was a revelation. In my son's eyes, I was no longer his mother. I was background noise, clutter, an inconvenience to be managed. The laughter inside the house grew louder, muffled through the glass, and I knew I couldn't go back in. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I turned the key in the ignition, hands still trembling, and drove away slowly. The road shimmered with streetlights and frost, and with each mile, the tightness in my chest eased just a little. I didn't cry. I had no tears left. But I knew something had broken, something deep and irreversible. That night, the woman who had built her life around love and sacrifice quietly disappeared. And in her place, something new was born. A silence sharper than any word her son had ever spoken. I told them I wasn't feeling well. My voice didn't tremble. It was calm, almost polite. Layla looked up briefly, her smile tight. "Of course. Joan, get some rest." Sterling didn't even glance my way. "Yeah, Mom. Drive safe." That was it. No concern. No warmth. Just the scrape of forks against plates as I slipped quietly from the table. The air outside was cold and sharp. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing it in, staring at the house glowing behind me, the home I had helped pay for, filled with laughter that no longer included me. I walked down the path slowly, the sound of my heels faint against the stone. I didn't drive home. Instead, I parked a few houses down, beneath a leafless oak, where I could still see the lights through the windows. From there, the house looked perfect, like a photograph of happiness. Through the glass, I saw silhouettes moving, heard muffled laughter, my family, my life's work, my sacrifice. And yet, I sat outside in the dark, unseen. The tears came silently at first, then harder, until I couldn't stop. My hands gripped the steering wheel as sobs racked through me, years of exhaustion and heartbreak spilling out in the quiet night. I had given everything, every shift, every dollar, every piece of myself to build that home, that life, and now I was nothing more than an afterthought at their table. When the tears finally stopped, I sat still, eyes swollen, breath shaky. The house glowed like a jewel in the distance. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. That was the moment I understood. My sacrifices had never been seen as love. They had been taken as duty. My care had become routine. My devotion invisible. I wasn't loved for what I gave. I was useful for what I provided. The realization hollowed me out. But inside that emptiness, something new began to form. The ache hardened, cooled, and sharpened into something clear and unbreakable. I whispered into the dark. Enough. By the time I returned to my apartment, I knew what I needed to do. I turned on the kitchen light. Its glow soft and familiar. Everything was quiet, the same silence I used to fear. Tonight, it steadied me. I went to the closet and pulled down an old metal box, its hinges squeaking as I opened it. Inside were the remnants of decades of responsibility folders, documents, receipts. I spread them across the kitchen table, one by one. The mortgage deed, my name right beside Sterling's. The car title for Layla's SUV, legally mine. The emergency fund statements, every contribution from me. For years, I had kept these things neatly filed away, thinking they were just paperwork. Tonight, they were something else. They were proof. They were power. I ran my fingers over the documents, my pulse steady. He thinks I'm old and powerless, I whispered. He mistook my patience for weakness. I felt the strength in those words settle into my bones. He forgot who he's dealing with. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. The clock ticked on the wall. My tears had dried, replaced by an unfamiliar calm. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligning the corners like a soldier preparing for battle. They had told me to stop, to stay quiet, to fade away. But silence was no longer surrender. It was strategy. And before the night was over, I knew exactly how I would use it. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke before sunrise. The apartment was still. The sky, a soft gray. For a moment, I sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a passing train. My heart was calm, my mind clear. I had spent a lifetime reacting now. It was time to act. I pulled a small suitcase from the closet and laid it open on the bed. I didn't need much. A few changes of clothes, my nursing license, the photograph of David from our wedding day, and the metal box of documents. That was all. The rest, the furniture, the linens, the quiet remnants of my old life could stay behind. I had carried them long enough. When everything was packed, I took one last look around the apartment, the framed pictures on the wall, the clock above the stove, the vase of fading flowers on the counter. They all felt like memories that no longer belonged to me. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. I started the car just as the first light broke over the horizon. The city streets were empty, the air cool and sharp. As I drove south, the miles rolled beneath me like a slow shedding of skin. Ohio faded into Kentucky, then Tennessee, and finally, Georgia. The air grew warmer, softer, carrying the scent of pine and ocean salt. I stopped only for gas and coffee, never looking back. By the time I reached Florida, the sun hung low and gold above the water. I found a small apartment in St. Augustine, a simple, sunlit place with white walls, clean floors, and a balcony that faced the sea. The landlord, an older woman with kind eyes, handed me the keys without asking many questions. That night, I stood outside, barefoot on the cool tiles, watching waves break under the moonlight. The ocean roared softly, steady and eternal, and I felt something inside me loosen for the first time in years. The next morning, I brewed a cup of coffee and carried it to the balcony. The sea breeze swept through my hair, and I breathed in deeply. It was time. I opened my phone and began making calls, each one quiet, deliberate, final. First, I called my lawyer in Cincinnati. "Good morning, Susan," I said when she answered. My voice didn't shake. "I need to update my will." She hesitated. "Of course. Joan, what changes are you thinking?" "Call, I want to establish a fund," I said. "The David Patterson Nursing Scholarship. It will provide tuition support for nurses in training. Everything I own goes to that fund." "And your son?" she asked carefully. "Sterling is to be disinherited. Explicitly. Leave no room for challenge." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then a quiet, "Understood," she said softly. "I'll make it happen." Next, I called my financial advisor. "I'd like to liquidate the joint emergency fund," I said. "Transfer the full amount into a new account under my name only." He hesitated, surprised. "Joan, are you sure?" "That fund, I'm sure." I cut in. "It was my money from the start. I just let someone else forget that." When that was done, I reached for the last set of calls. "This is regarding the mortgage for the Hyde Park property," I told the bank representative. "I intend to remove myself as cosigner, effective immediately." Her tone shifted. "Mrs. Patterson, that will require refinancing from the primary borrower." "I'm aware," I said. "Send the notice today." I could almost see Sterling's face when he opened that letter. The confusion, the panic, the realization that the safety net was gone. My final call was to the insurance company. "The Lexus registered under my name," I said. "Report it for repossession. The vehicle is no longer in my possession or authorized use." When the last call ended, I set the phone down and exhaled. The sun had risen higher now, its light glinting off the water like shards of glass. Below, gulls wheeled in the wind. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. For the first time in decades, every decision, every word, every step was mine. I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me. The silence that had once been my burden was now my weapon. I had spoken enough for one lifetime now. Silence would do the talking. The calls started 3 days later. At first, just one or two, then dozens, until the screen of my phone looked like a storm cloud of missed connections. 55 calls in total by the end of the week. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I let the voicemails pile up, listening to them once a day. The way someone checks the weather just to know what kind of storm was passing through. The first messages were almost casual. "Mom, where are you?" Sterling said, his tone impatient but still composed. "This isn't funny. Call me back." I pictured him sitting at that expensive kitchen island, tapping his fingers on the marble counter, assuming I'd come around like I always did. I smiled faintly and deleted it. By the second day, the tone shifted. Layla's voice trembled through the speaker. "Joan, the tow truck took my car. They said, it's registered in your name. I don't understand what's happening. Please, can you just call us, please?" Her panic trembled through every word, a sound I knew well. Consequences aren't loud, they're desperate. By the fifth message, Sterling's composure cracked. "Mom," he shouted, the words breaking with rage. "The bank called. They said you're being removed from the mortgage. And we have 30 days to refinance." "What the hell are you doing? You can't do this to us. It's our children's home. You're destroying this family. Destroying this family." The irony made me laugh softly to myself. Families don't break in a day, they erode, little by little, until one word at a dinner table finishes what years of silence began. I sat on the balcony, the Florida sun glinting off the water, and deleted every message. My silence was my answer. In the days that followed, I settled into my new life: coffee, ocean air, and quiet purpose. Volunteering at the clinic felt like coming home. For the first time in years, my hands were steady, guided not by duty, but peace. Sometimes, after work, I'd walk along the beach barefoot, letting the waves lap at my ankles. The world felt new, cleaner, quieter, softer. I didn't think about the house in Hyde Park or the people still inside it. I thought about breathing, and how strange it felt to do it freely. One morning, I stood on the balcony, coffee in hand, the sun warm on my face. The ocean shimmered before me, vast and alive. I wasn't just a mother or a widow anymore. I was Joan. My son wanted me silent. I whispered. He got his wish. My silence took everything he took for granted and gave me back my life. The waves answered softly. And for the first time in years, silence felt like peace. Joan Patterson's journey was one of heartbreak, courage, and quiet redemption. After years of sacrifice and silence, she finally reclaimed her dignity and peace, proving that strength doesn't always roar, it can whisper too. Her story reminds us that self-worth is never lost, only forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to comment below and tell us your thoughts, or share a story of your own. Visit our page for more powerful and emotional tales like this one.